Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for June 8th, 2015. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Today, on the phone, we have Jim Clausing. Welcome back to the show, Jim.
Thanks. Good to be back.
All right, good to have you. And on the couch here with me, I have Matt Kaiser, one of our other security analysts. How you doing today, Matt?
Pretty good, John. How about yourself?
Good. So let's jump into the first story. And I guess, unless you've been living under a rock this week, you probably have heard about the Office of Personnel Management breach that occurred. And kind of break this down for you a little bit in a nutshell. But the long and short is about 4 million current and former government workers, their personal information. We don't really know what types of information, but they're saying some personal identifying information, social security numbers were stolen. The breach was detected around the April timeframe, but it looks like the attacker was probably in there as far back as late 2014 somewhere. FBI is working to investigate like they always would. Eyesight Partners actually put out a little blurb that they think they may believe that this is linked to the Anthem, or the same actor set may be related to the Anthem and Premera healthcare breaches that occurred, and we've talked about them on the show, I'm sure, at some point in the past. If that's the case, a lot of signs are pointing this direction that it's probably a China nation state type of thing going on here. So we've discussed this kind of stuff before on the show a lot, mostly with respect to the private sector and government agencies, defense industrial base. They get targeted by these nation state actors who are trying to break into their networks, steal their intellectual property or other strategic intelligence that they can use to use in some other way, however that might be. I guess the couple of things I was going to mention, and I think we always say this around this type of stuff, is you're never going to be able to stop all of these attacks. So the best thing you can do is try to be able to detect them as best as possible. And the industry is getting smarter about this. I think we're doing a good job in general, but still a lot of stuff gets through. Unless it's a well-known toolkit that somebody's using, these actors are pretty crafty in terms of making their activity that they use for their remote access toolkits to be to kind of blend in with the background noise of your network traffic. Having a good user education program, right? We always talk about that. We have a really good one here at AT&T in terms of letting our general user population be really aware of the dangers of clicking on, spear-phished emails or any kind of other types of activities like rogue USB thumb drives just left around, maybe in a parking lot or wherever. You don't want to just grab those and stick them into your computer. They could be Trojanized. And then the other thing I was going to say, and I'll let you guys chime in here, with respect to OPM specifically, this attacker might try to parlay all this information that they got here about the 4 million or so former government workers identifying information, use that to then spearfish them, maybe spearfish in such a way that it looks like let's say we were on the list there, I get an email from Matt to me saying, hey, check out this link about some security thing I found. So they'll do spearfishes like that, where they try to make it look like it came from somebody in order to lure you into a false sense of security. So that's a possibility that they need to be aware of. I don't know. That's what I wanted to kind of mention about that. I didn't know if anybody else had any other insights or thoughts about this particular breach.
If it was social security numbers and that kind of stuff that's out there, if it does get out into the hands of criminals, then it's the same old thing that they seem to do after data breaches everywhere else. They tell you, watch your credit report and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It may be worthwhile actually taking the next step and putting a lock on your credit, where basically you can't open any new accounts in your name or anything without going through some additional hoops. There are some folks I know out there who have just decided that's their standard default setting now because of all these breaches over the last 5, 6, 7 years, that they're just going to leave their credit locked. It makes it harder to open new credit card accounts and that kind of thing, but it also prevents the bad guys from opening, new accounts in your name. So just something to toss out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I keep thinking OPM has access to this information about who does and doesn't have a clearance now, and a target list of, I'm not going to say 4 million people in the U.S. have clearances, but it's still a sizable number of people in that database who might be subject to further targeting simply because they're privy to extra information. So it might not be that we have people trying to profit monetarily off of it, but there may be some sort of intelligence gathering, value to that data, if it truly is a state, nation state behind all this.
Right, and I've heard some discussion, on some of the news stations and whatnot, saying, well, they might actually be trying to assess these 4 million plus users that have clearances, or however many it is, to kind of figure out, well, what makes a good candidate for clearances, so that they can kind of, if they want to get people into, a U.S. security clearance program, then they know what would be, make it a smoother path, so to speak, let's say. That's all speculation, but I have heard that, so that's what some of the people in intelligence are worried about, in terms of, somebody like a nation state trying to put their own agents inside the U.S. government with clearances, and trying to figure out, okay, well, can we use this information to figure out what would either rule them out or make them more likely to get their clearance go through. So, interesting.
Data set apparently goes back to sometime in 1985, I think, was reported.
Oh, the data set of what was actually stolen.
Yep.
Right. Okay, that's a pretty long period of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So interesting. Anyway, one to keep an eye out for. It's, just like a lot of these other ones, there's a lot of these breaches that occur. And that's kind of our job, is to try to help defend and prevent that kind of thing from happening. Not that we're ever always going to be always successful, but in general, that's what everybody needs to do. All right, so the second story we've got for the show here is one that we cover pretty much monthly. Microsoft released their June patch set this week, Jim, so do you have some information on that one?
Yeah. Today is Patch Tuesday, so as happens every month, Microsoft has released a bunch of patches. This month they've released 8. They rate 2 of them as critical. For some reason they've skipped MS-15-058. I'm not sure. They'll probably release that one later, but so they start with MS-15-056 and go up to -064. As is the case pretty much every month, there's a critical update for Internet Explorer. I believe the IE patch covers something like 12 or 14 CVEs, and they rate it as critical. One of those CVEs was previously publicly disclosed, so I'm not sure if there are any working exploits for it yet, but the CVE was out there earlier, so if there's not a working exploit yet, there will be shortly. The other critical one was in Windows Media Player. Again, this one would be, some sort of crafted, video or something that would be exploited that would allow remote code execution. Not aware of any exploits in the wild for that one yet. The other one where there is an exploit in the wild at the moment is in what they're calling common controls, the Microsoft common controls. Mm-hmm. Basically, it's actually the IE developer tools. So even though there's an exploit out there, the tools are probably not all that widely used, so it's probably not one to worry about too much. The ones that that Microsoft rates as important that caught my eye are MS-15-059, which is remote code execution vulnerability in Microsoft Office. They rate this with an exploitability of 1, which means they expect to see exploit code within the next 30 days, but they rank it as important, which may mean that it requires the user to click on a link, but we know that users often click on links. So the other one that caught my eye was MS-15-064, which is a privilege escalation in Microsoft Exchange. This one could be used in an enterprise to potentially, elevate privileges, maybe get admin or domain admin in a domain environment. So that's one to keep an eye on. Again, there's no exploit in the wild at the moment, and Microsoft only rates it as important, but they generally only rate privilege escalation as important. So that's one to keep an eye on. Again, as we say every month, these need to be tested and, to the extent possible, deployed, ASAP, because once these are out there, the bad guys are going to be reverse engineering them immediately. So so eight bulletins this month. Microsoft rates 2 of them critical, the rest important. And like I said, I think there are a couple other ones that we really need to keep our eye on over the next few days and weeks. But nothing really out of the ordinary for the monthly patches.
Okay.
So there you have it.
Yeah, like you said, very important to get those patches installed sooner than later. That's for sure, as soon as possible. The one thing that came to mind while you're rattling those off is, if I was a bad guy, which I'm not, like an advanced persistent threat actor, I would want to leverage that Microsoft Office vulnerability to weaponize some documents, send them to my target, and then once I compromise them, I'm going to use that Exchange privilege escalation to compromise the mail server. So that's like the 2 primary things APT guys do,
right,
in terms of getting in. And then once they're in, the first thing they go after is the company email to try to figure out what this company is up to and certain things like that. So just to kind of
that's why those 2 caught my attention too, and why I mentioned them, as those are the things that the bad guys are going to go after.
Yeah, absolutely. So just trying to illustrate an example of why it might be more important to you to get these installed. Not to say that somebody's definitely going to use it for those purposes, but that's like a very common tactic for some of these advanced persistent threat actors, as well as other actors. Like we also saw in terms of weaponized documents, I think we covered this story in the past few weeks, where resumes were getting sent through some of these resume finding services that are out there, and they kind of get sent into the resume finding service and then to the actual hiring manager, and then they open it and they get infected. So that's another way that some of these actors will kind of vector their targeted weaponized documents into companies that they're interested in. So
because they know that someone in HR's job is to do nothing but open resumes all day.
Yep. Yeah, pretty much. And they might not be the most. They're probably not security people. Hopefully you've got a good end user awareness education program to be careful about opening documents and clicking on links. But that's a tactic that they've been using over the past couple of months here. So moving on to the next story, it looks like one that you were looking at, Matt, related to the Internet of Insecure Things again. I guess you got some updated information here.
So this was an interesting, I'm going to call it a release. So a group of master's students at I hope I said this right, Universidad Europea de Madrid in Spain.
The University of Madrid.
Pretty much. Released basically 60 vulnerabilities in one go against 22 different Internet of Things platforms, mostly modems and customer premise equipment. Okay. Like if your ISP sends you a very specific router that you hook up and they provide service through that, we're talking that kind of stuff. And this runs the gamut of all the same old IoT vulns we've been seeing for a very long time. A number of them are devices that Telefonica, which I believe is a Spanish ISP, gives out, like I was saying, to their customers. There are a number of other smaller, or not smaller, but less represented ISPs in there, Vodafone and Orange being 2 of them that people might recognize. Mm-hmm. These vulnerabilities seem to mostly affect those devices, and they may not have much of an impact for American users, but overseas users would probably want to take a look, see if their devices are on this list. And if they are, if you have the option, take them off the network until you're sure that a patch has been released. Okay. One of the things that I'm not very surprised about, I'm a little bit sad about, is that these kind of vulnerabilities, the majority of them are web vulnerabilities. There's nothing very specific to the Internet of Things here, except that these devices all tend to have, web control features, from within the network you would log in. Exactly.
Purposes, right.
So, I mean, it's sad that most of the vulnerabilities that we know about from the IoT devices tend to be these sorts of web-based things, which makes them vulnerable to, I think we talked about either in the last show or the one before, things like that exploit kit, where if you can bounce the attack off someone's browser and towards the device, they would be vulnerable in that way as well to the outside world.
Right, and that's why these cross-site request forgery type vulnerabilities are a big deal, is that's how the bad guys bounce them through your web browser inside your home network back towards these Internet of Things web interfaces.
Precisely.
Right.
Yep. And there's a number of those at the top of the list. So this isn't the first time we've seen such a large dump of IoT or embedded vulnerabilities. Actually, at DEF CON 22, a group called GTV Hacker, who was renamed to Exploiteers, if you want to go look them up, they released a whole bunch of device vulnerabilities in the same way, all in one go. So I think the takeaway from that is that these aren't necessarily hard to find. If a group of master students can do this, or a bunch of hackers on the internet can, they're very low-hanging fruit sorts of things.
Right.
And the problem is we're still seeing this. And it kind of needs to get addressed. I realize a lot of these are very low-cost devices, and people treat them like it's junk hacking, but the impact is still very real.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said before, most of these don't have very good patch management processes. So people buy them, they put them on their network. You might not ever upgrade the thing until years later, even though patches have been released. I've noticed that some of the vendors are actually getting better about that now, where they have automatic patch updates. I actually just bought a home router recently, a new one. It was a Linksys actually, and it actually has an automated update, and they hook up to a cloud account and all this stuff. In any event, most of them are smaller embedded devices, don't have a lot of high performance power, although they're getting more powerful as time goes on here. It's one of those things, if you have one of these, I would recommend going to take a look to see if you're on the list there. Maybe assess how critical is your vulnerability, because I'm assuming they're not all the same, and see if you can do something to mitigate that. I'm not saying go get a new one, but because who knows what the next model has. You would think, though, with such limited processing power and such limited space to actually have a web interface, they write some tighter code, right? So, but I guess you never know. Maybe the fact that they're cramped into a small kind of footprint, that they don't really have the ability to really write a very robust interface most of the time.
Input validation code, because it's not strictly necessary for what it, yeah.
Or they may not think it is because it's only exposed to the LAN side, but like we talked about, there's some of these actors who can kind of, run a drive-by that runs inside your browser that goes and attacks your home router from the inside. So, good story. Another one that we should probably just keep an eye on. We've seen all sorts of Internet of Things stuff get compromised: DVRs, home routers, residential gateways. What are those? Your disk drives that are connected to the network there. Yeah, network attached storage. So all these things are out there, and it's just a matter of making sure. My other thought is when these things get compromised, I've said this before as well, you rarely will actually know that your DSL modem or your residential gateway is compromised, because it's at the very edge of your perimeter network. So you won't even see that traffic unless you have something like you're one of us and you're actually watching the stuff between your residential gateway to your to your internet provider. But most people are just looking from the gateway in towards their own home network. So if somebody compromises it, you might not ever know that happened, and years could go by where somebody's using it. And your device doesn't usually reboot, so it'll persist in memory, stay there, and continue to run the malware that they deploy on there. All right, moving on to the next story, talking about malware. but malware of a different sort, instead of running on IoT devices and vulnerabilities in those, I guess there's been some recent malware targeting point-of-sale systems, Jim?
Yeah. We talk about these. It seems like every other month or so, there's another report of malware targeting point-of-sale devices, and this one was actually a report that came from Trend Micro. They discovered a family of malware that they're calling Malum POS. This malware at the moment is targeting a particular brand of POS device, point-of-sale devices that Oracle acquired last year. But the interesting thing about this malware is that it disguises itself as NVIDIA video drivers. That's again, most of these point-of-sale devices are embedded Windows XP. I'm not sure if this particular brand is XP or if it's embedded Windows 7, but a lot of them are still XP. And so you're going to look for, if you're even looking at what processes are running on there, you see the display drivers. Well, NVIDIA is a typical driver that you're going to have, type of video card, so type of video drivers you're going to have in there. And it actually it scrapes memory looking for the credit card information, the stuff on the magnetic tracks. It's got a couple of regular expressions that it uses to look for the track 1 and track 2 data off the magnetic strips, and it looks for it in up to 100 different processes. So it's actually rather robust, and while it appears that this particular one was targeted at that particular line of POS devices that Oracle just acquired, the program appears to have capabilities that it could target other things, other POS devices than that, and potentially, as I said, it's looking for 100 different processes, so lots of different types of software running on the POS device that it's aware of and knows to look for their particular memory footprint and look for the credit card info in that memory footprint. So this particular family has a lot of capabilities that, or appears to have a lot of capabilities that it might not be tapping yet. So it looks like this is one that's under active development and is one to keep an eye on. The report from Trend Micro actually has some really good stuff, and it's only about 12 pages long. So if you are into this kind of thing, I highly recommend that you actually go and read the whole report. They've got Yara signatures in there. They show the regular expressions that they're using to try to detect the track 1 and track 2 info. So it's helpful to understand, if you're like me, it wasn't entirely clear on what the format of this track 1 and track 2 data is. The report actually goes into how they're looking for that. So some interesting stuff. The data that they extract, then they use a simple substitution cipher and store it on the device in a file that's got a name that looks like an NVIDIA DLL, but is actually just a data file. And it isn't clear to me exactly when they or how they attempt to exfiltrate the data again. That's a part of this that I haven't actually studied in detail yet. But so there are some indicators of compromise that could be used here to look for this stuff. But it's as I said, it looks to be a piece of malware that's under active development, and it has some capabilities that, while they're not particularly super advanced, are worth keeping an eye on.
Right, right. Stan and I actually yesterday were playing around with this malware. Well, I shouldn't say playing around. We're analyzing it in Ollie Debug and stepping through the code, just trying to figure out if there is some kind of command and control that they relay the stuff back up to. I didn't get very far yesterday with it, but an interesting aside that maybe you could look for if you're kind of a novice user, an easy thing to go look for is Jim mentioned that it registers a service as the NVIDIA driver. I forget the full title, but it's like NVIDIA something something driver, but the E in driver is a 3 that they use, so it's DRIV3R. So that's a very obvious tell if you actually go look at your control panel services on your Windows machine. You see that, then you might want to go take a closer look to make sure that you don't have this on there. Interesting piece of malware, though. This point of sale stuff is, it's really kind of come into its own in terms of a flavor of malware. We talk about lots of flavors of malware like ransomware and some of these crimeware, and then now point of sale has kind of come into its own as its own kind of family, so to speak, of a malware family. So, gotta keep an eye out for it, and if you do have point of sale systems, make sure you have tight security around them. Sometimes people overlook them, just like they overlook the IoT devices, I think, because they just assume it's just this thing that I bought from somebody, I'm gonna put it on my network, I'm gonna trust that whoever I bought this from did their due diligence in terms of getting it secured. But sometimes they did, it's just what you did around it, you kind of left it a little too open. So in any event.
That's one of the things that every time one of these new point of sale things comes up, we talk about it. Your point of sale devices need to be on their own isolated network, where they're not on. Most of the time, they really shouldn't be talking to the internet. They should be talking just to, their back office components and that kind of thing. Even though these are Windows devices, you don't really want to allow web browsing and that kind of thing from your point of sale devices. So, there are ways that you can isolate them and lock them down to protect yourself a little bit. But as you said, it's not clear from the report how the malware gets on there either. So we saw in one of the big ones, I think it was the Target one from a couple of years ago, where it was pushed out from the management side to the point of sale device. It might not have been Target. I don't remember now, but so a lot of pieces that need to be secured. But one of the things you can do is isolate them to the extent possible from the rest of your network.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Well, they'll still need to call out to validate credit cards and things like that. But if you know what you're doing, you can still.
Yeah, and that might go through some other centralized server or something too. I don't know how they, some of these things get deployed. So the individual point of sale machines might not go right out to a credit card.
So if you've got 2 or 3 terminals in your restaurant, for example, you may have a master that it all goes
Possibly.
out.
I don't know how it's deployed, but you have a good point though. You could isolate it and still firewall it off so that it can only talk to the credit card authorization service and not to anything else. So that's always a good practice. So the next story we have on the lighter side, so to speak, although maybe not so light if you become compromised by this, but I guess someone's converted some toys to be garage door hacking devices.
Yep. So this is the latest from Sammy Kamkar, who people might remember from back in the day, the Sammy worm on MySpace. That was him. Mm-hmm. He's made a name for himself with some pretty high-profile hacks. This one I think is kind of interesting because it's, well, let's just dive into it. There's a device called the IMMe. It's actually a device from 2010. And it's very hard to get these days. You can still find them on eBay. People have claimed to be able to find them for as little as $10, but if you look today, they're always about $100 to $200 because of their rarity. And for another reason, which I'll get to, Sammy has taken this device and turned it into a garage door code brute forcer. Okay. You walk up with the device, it's got a little antenna that he's hacked onto the outside of it, and you press the go button, a picture of Neon Cat appears on the screen, and garage doors start opening. Now, how did this happen? So the IME platform has what's called a system on a chip inside of it. It's like an all-in-one chip, and this one's designed for radio frequency communications. The original toy was designed so that people could send each other little over the air, not SMS, not internet, just little over the air messages using wireless. It's actually had a long history in the hacker community of being used for fun little things. Michael Osman of Great Scott Gadgets, I think is his company, he turned it into a wireless frequency display, so you could take a look at what sort of wireless traffic was going on in the area. Other people have found other uses for it. You could flash the firmware fairly easily with instructions that are online, and I think Michael Osman actually designed a bit of firmware for it that would allow him to open his own garage door, but just one code. Now what Sammy's code does is improves on this, looks at the frequencies used by several garage door manufacturers, and basically bakes in the functionality to loop through all of those garage door open codes in a very quick way.
It's limited number of pins, right? It's probably like a 4-digit code or 6-digit code or
Yep.
something, right?
So I think the really interesting, cool technical stuff that he did here, it stands a bit on the shoulders of giants, if you follow what I'm saying. The code is mostly there, but he's got some really interesting optimizations. He doesn't break between attempting. He doesn't say send this code, wait a second, send this code. It all just blasts straight through. And there's an interesting algorithm. I'm going to butcher the name of it as well. The de Bruijn numbers or sequences.
Okay.
And I actually came across this a while back without knowing what it was called. It's a way of taking a set of numbers. So if you wanted to try all the pins, like 000, 001, 002, if I wanted to do 001, that would cover both 000 and then 001. Contiguously. So if you're not checking every 3 seconds, if you can just keep spitting digits and it'll look for those 3 numbers you're looking for anywhere in the sequence, you can design a sequence to minimize the number of digits you actually have to send, saving you a whole bunch of time. So I actually came across this. Someone had released these sequences for phone voicemail. You used to be able to dial into your own personal voicemail by knowing a 3-digit number.
Yeah.
Well, somebody came up with these number sequences, I guess, either through knowing the algorithm or on their own. You could just, press play on your tape recorder and it would go da-da-da-da-da, play all the numbers back. And eventually it would say, okay, that's the passcode. You are now into the voicemail system. So it's been around for a little while, I think, but it's interesting that he applied it here in order to shorten the time that he needs to open up garage doors dramatically. So there's some cool optimizations here going on. I'm not sure it's entirely, amazing research. It's not like someone came in out of the blue and said, here's a child's toy. It now opens garage doors. It's like a 5-year process of improvement on the platform and figuring out how to flash new firmware. And Michael Osman and Travis Goodspeed and a couple other people have been involved in working on this platform. But now you've got it packaged in a little pink device that you can walk down the street and open garage doors with.
Right.
So that's fun.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's not fun if you have a garage door that gets opened up.
So that's important to note, is that not all garage doors are susceptible. If you've got a garage door that supports rolling codes, which is to say that every time you send transmit, your fob will send something different, and the box will pick it up and say, okay, new code, it's valid, and then open the door for you. You're not necessarily vulnerable to this. It's only systems where the code stays static all of the time and never gets changed, where you can brute force it, because no matter how many attempts you make, you won't be cycling through the rolling code sequence that the modern ones have. So if you want to know what you've got, you can usually crack open either the garage door opener controller itself or the fob, and if there's a set of dip switches on the inside, that means that the code is programmable, but only to one actual code.
Right.
So that suggests that you're in the market for a new garage door opener at that point.
So I guess either get a new garage door opener or you have to install fail to ban on your garage door, right?
I'd love
If anybody's
to have
not
that.
familiar with fail to ban, that's basically how you try to prevent brute force attacks on your SSH or Telnet or whatever on your devices, which I'd recommend you look into if you actually have those devices exposed to the internet on SSH. Yeah, so interesting story. It reminded me also of, I think we did a story quite a ways back about somebody who did something with Zigbee, which is a home automation, I think it might have been Zigbee, which is like a home automation protocol. And they mailed a package with a rogue device that spoke Zigbee to an address, and then it was close enough once it arrived on their doorstep to talk to the internal network and break in. I forget, this was a couple of years ago, I think we talked about it. So,
Are you sure it was the show and you're sure it wasn't CSI Cyber?
well, yeah, it does sound kind of futuristic. No, I'm pretty sure it was the show. But in any event, so, there's a lot of these home automation things. And to me, that kind of worries me more because I don't want to, want to make sure that my home is secure as well as my computer.
Well,
but
let's not confuse
more
things.
so my
This
home.
is definitely not home automation tech. No, this is
Right,
this
it's
is
not.
plain old RF garage door opener land.
Right.
It's separate from that.
Right. Although some systems integrate with your garage door now. Some of these home automation things that you can get, and they can talk to your garage door just like this device could, but in a legitimate way. So, anyway.
Yeah, but in any case, it is a concern because if you've got garage doors that are susceptible to this is something that criminals could use. Open up the garage door, and now they're inside. Even if you've got the door between the garage and the house locked, they're inside where they can hide from, they're not visible to the street trying to break into your house.
Right.
So this is something to be somewhat concerned with.
Right.
So I will say that Sammy acknowledges that this might be a problem and has modified the code that he released so then it's not fully functional. You have to know, he says you have to know at least a little bit about RF engineering in order to make the code that he released actually do what he claimed it would.
Right. So
It's
some street thug is not going to necessarily be able to.
not
rewrite his
necessarily.
code.
But of course, there's always the temptation for some smart aleck out there who does understand RF to go and say, hey, Sammy, here's the bug in your code.
Right.
Post that online, and then it doesn't much matter anymore.
All right, well, something to consider. And even though it is a kid's toy, I don't think it's derived from a kid's toy. It's not necessarily kids play. It's not a simple thing to do in terms of working with the firmware on these types of devices and hacking them to do this type of thing. But interesting nonetheless. All right, so let's move on to the internet weather, and we have a couple of things to look at, but nothing super major in terms of troubling findings, or at least not new troubling findings. In terms of the top most probe ports, these are the ports that get scanned the most, irrespective of how many people are doing it, just in sheer volume, how many scans are against these particular ports. Port 80 TCP is at the #1 position. It moved up 6 positions. We'll take a look at that and why that is in a slide in a bit here. 135 TCP, which is your NetBIOS file sharing kind of thing. I forget exactly it's an older protocol. I don't think we really use it anymore. We talked about this as well. There's been some increased scanning on this again. I keep meaning to go look at our honeypots to see if I've captured any of that, and I never remember to go do that, but hopefully next week I will. In the past, when we had seen it, it was trying to use like a very typical password or something and just try to hit everybody. I guess probably just trying to see if anybody responded with that typical NetBIOS password in order to get into it. But in any event, we'll try to dig that up again. 23 TCP Telnet, that's been static at the 3rd position in the list. That's, again, your IoT devices, or in general, it's a lot of these Internet of Things devices that get compromised, usually via port 23 TCP Telnet, and then they start scanning for more of these so that they can build their botnet out even bigger. 22 TCP, which is SSH, again, similar. There's a lot of actors out there scanning for this so that they'll deploy malware on there as well. There's a lot of IoT devices that listen on SSH as well, but as well as Linux machines just in general that do. 443 TCP is your HTTPS. That could just be for scanning to find servers that are supporting that. Could be Heartbleed scanning, could be all these other various vulnerabilities that have been talked about in the wild lately. 8080 TCP, that's usually proxy scanning, although I always remind people Tomcat's on that port, and we know that there's certain actor sets out there that like to scan for Tomcat and weak default passwords on your Tomcat administrative port, which is what that is. So secure it if you have that exposed to the internet. 445 TCP is your SMB. There's various worms that scan on that. 1433 TCP is your Microsoft SQL Server. That's moved up 5 positions. I actually pulled a chart on that, but it's not that interesting. Even though it moved up 5 positions, it's really not that much more volume than it was at position 13 last week. So it doesn't really show any large movement, even though it did move up quite a few positions there. 1900 UDP, which we've been talking about a lot, is your Simple Service Discovery Protocol, SSDP. We're seeing a lot of reflection activity with that. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about reflection in a slide in the future here, a couple of slides down the pike here. So keep that in mind when we get to that point. And then the ICMP echo requests are probably just background noise. We see lots of ICMP in general. So the AT&T, the area that I kind of wanted to point out that is the increase here is what's under this red bar that I kind of highlighted here. And you can kind of see that excluding this big, huge thing, so this big, huge thing back in the middle of May or early to mid-May timeframe, we talked about this. This was actually a denial of service attack against a Chinese gaming company on AT&T where they actually were flooding like a /22 that they might have owned or something like that. So it was a pretty wide address space that they owned all of, and whoever was attacking them for whatever reason was hitting every IP. Instead of just trying to hit like a single IP that is at their address space, they're basically just trying to flood their router that's going to handle all of that traffic. So that's what this big lump is in here. This is actually attack traffic, not scanning traffic. But because they were trying to hit so many sources, in our data it looks like scanning traffic, because that's kind of how we differentiate scanning from an attack. Usually attacks in our data here is more to a single point. When it looks like somebody's trying to send SYN packets to a bunch of different addresses, that's what kind of flags it in our system as a scan source. And we're actually going to talk about that in an upcoming slide that's really confusing. That will be interesting. So in terms of who's doing this recent stuff over the past week or so here under this red bar, it's actually a small number of sources. There's a US web hosting provider that's accounting for a large portion of it, as well as a couple of IP addresses in China and the Czech Republic. You know, what they're up to, I'm not quite sure. They're probably just scanning for port 80 for various reasons, trying to identify machines that are listening on that. It could be that they're looking for your Internet of Things devices that have web administrative ports on port 80, which there are quite a few that have that. So that's one possibility of what might be scanning beyond just regular web servers. So here's the most sources probing. So this is kind of coordinated activity. This means that somebody told a bunch of devices to start scanning on these ports. And this usually is some kind of indicator of botnet activity or something otherwise. Not surprising, 23 TCP Telnet is at the #1 position. That's your IoT things. And it's actually a very large slice of the pie. We've talked about this before. I probably should have pulled a chart for this. I didn't get a chance to do that, but I would say this is maybe 30%. I don't know. It's definitely greater than 25%, right? Of all scanning activity in total is accounting for telnet traffic. 445 TCP, which we've already discussed. You've got some ICMP stuff, which I'm just going to ignore, because a lot of this is either echo requests or port unreachable backscatter type stuff. 27015 UDP is your Valve Half-Life gaming server. This just manifests to kind of look like scanning activity, but in reality it's not. This is an anomaly that's not really a security issue. 17788 UDP is that PP stream protocol, which we're not entirely sure what's up with that, but it looks like a peer-to-peer kind of video streaming protocol, possibly used for Chinese video type things. I'm not quite sure, because it looks like a lot of the actors are in China that are utilizing this protocol, but that's the only association we have so far until we actually see some real traffic there. And as we always mention, if you watch the show and you have some more insight about some of this stuff that we talk about, please let us know. I'll give you our email address at the end of the show. The real interesting one here, and I think this is the winner in terms of most improved, although we really don't want something to improve here, but 80 UDP moved up 86 positions. That's huge, right? So we've never seen anything move up 86 positions. But the reality of the situation here is this is erroneous. It's not really scanning traffic, and I'm going to explain that in a second, although I wish I had a better picture. But let's just take a quick look at what it looks like. So you kind of see here on the 80 UDP, and even though it's labeled HTTP, the well-known IANA service for HTTP or AD/UDP is HTTP, but nobody really uses HTTP over UDP. Although I will say, Google has an experimental service that they're toying with to have HTTP run over port 80 UDP, but that's not what this is. In any event, you can see that yesterday and the day before, we had some 10,000, 7,000 scan sources all in unison trying to scan on port 80 UDP. If you're actually to look at that traffic, what it really is not scanning activity at all. It was SNMP reflection activity. So we talked about SSDP, port 1900 UDP, being a potential reflection. And we talked last week about this. I kind of described, so if I'm a bad actor, I can forge a packet. So let's say Matt is my target. And his IP address is mattkaiser@att.com. That's not an IP address. But so when I create the packet, I put Matt's IP address as the source of my packet, and the destination is to a SNMP, in this case, an SNMP reflection device. So I have a list of all these devices out on the internet that I know that will answer an SNMP query. And since it's UDP, which is connectionless, I can create a packet, put a source IP of Matt's in there, I put a destination IP of the SNMP reflection, and I ask it a tiny little question. I say, hey, SNMP device out there, what is give me your entire SNMP state table. And when I do that, I make the source port also of my request to port 80. So source IP Matt, source port 80, destination port of the SNMP guy, destination IP of the guy, destination port 161. Probably going too long on this. In any event, that packet goes out to the guy, the SNMP reflection, and then he reflects it back to Matt. But when he does, he's going to send a lot of data. So my request is small. The amount of data that comes back to Matt is gigantic. So it's kind of, I like to say, it's akin to me sending a catalog or a little card to Sears Roebuck saying, please send me your catalog, and then they send a giant catalog to Matt instead. So what's happening here is exactly what I described there. But instead of targeting one person for whatever reason, I don't know, this particular actor was up to a bunch of shenanigans. So they were spraying packets at the SNMP reflectors with all kinds of source IPs, fake source IPs, that were going all scattering all across the internet. So to us, that looks like you got these SNMP reflectors out there trying to scan on port 80 UDP, which is how this manifests in this chart. Long story to get to the ultimate endpoint, but it's not a real issue in terms of this is mostly attack traffic, not really scanning traffic looking for people listening on port 80 UDP. Enough said about that. I wish I had a better picture to show you DNS reflection activity and how it works, but I think we have in the previous shows, so we could probably dig that up. Okay, so that's the show for today. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to get in touch with us, which we always appreciate if you do, please email us at AT&TThreatTraq@list.at.com. That's a newer email address that we just moved to, so take note of that. It's AT&TThreatTraq@list.att.com. You can also find AT&T ThreatTraq program on the AT&T Tech channel, and it's also available on YouTube and iTunes. Please follow us on Twitter as well. Our handle is @ATT Security. Thanks, Matt, for joining the show. Thanks, Jim, as always. I'm John Hogoboom. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Until then, keep your network safe.